Hey, beautiful souls, welcome to Ashes to Orchids, the podcast where we talk about turning pain into purpose, trauma into transformation, and heartbreak into healing. Today's episode is a deeply important one. If you or someone you know is experiencing DV, please know you are not alone. We're going to talk about two powerful tools that can save lives: protection orders and having a safe exit strategy. Leaving an abusive situation is dangerous, but with the right plan and legal support, it can be done safely. I have a special guest on the show today. She is an amazing advocate and inspiration for survivors everywhere. She has been a guiding light to others dealing with abuse, and she has saved many lives, all while going through her own struggles. We'll be sharing with you some practical advice and guidance on how to safely get out of dangerous situations. Our hope is that this episode educates and helps you or someone you love take the first or final step towards safety. Okay, before we dive in, I do just want to give a gentle content warning. We'll be talking about emotional trauma and psychological abuse, which may be triggering for some, so please take care of yourself as you listen, pause, breathe, or come back later if you need to. All right, let's begin. I just want to say thank you so much for taking time to share your story with us and being a part of this journey. I know it has been very draining and traumatic to say the least, but I do want you to know that your courage and strength does not go unnoticed, and we truly appreciate you for all that you continue to do to help others find safety and peace again. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me
Of
and
course.
allowing me to come and share my story and discuss definitely a hot topic. And I have been, I don't know, advocating for DV survivors or domestic violence survivors, if you will. We're going on about 20 years now. And this all started with being exposed to this as a young child and kind of seeing some things that I probably shouldn't have, and just kind of, I don't know, it leaves scars, mentally. And
Yeah.
then one of my family members when it was in a situation that was really dangerous, and that was like the first time I ever helped somebody like really get out and involve the police. And I was like, wow, I felt so empowered,
Yeah.
helping somebody. And from there, it just kind of grew. And who would have thought, like many years later, over 10 years after helping different people, and not as heavy as I have been over the past since I've had my own incident. But who would have thought that I would just become this person who I'm now receiving like referrals from women's shelters and police officers and realtors across the country. I mean, just random people who I've helped refer their friends who are in situations, and I just have become over time just a person of resource. I'm not an attorney or anything like that, just for my own protection, but always happy to help where I can, and it's something that holds true to my heart. I care about people in general and want to be able to help where I can. So, but yeah, that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Well, I love that, and I'm so honored to be able to speak with you, and thank you so much for helping others as well with this. I know it's a very difficult thing to go through for us, just not even as women, men go through it as well, but it happens a lot more than we realize, and
Oh yeah.
a lot of times, a lot of people are silenced or they, are afraid to get the help to get out of those situations. I did come from a home similar to those situations as well, so I know firsthand how that can be, so.
Oh my goodness. Absolutely, I can. And a little bit of this might be ambiguous or meaning having multiple meanings. So there are a few different types of what we would call ROs, which a lot of people refer to as restraining order. There is what's known as a domestic violence restraining order, or DVRO, as a lot of officers will call it. That is the most powerful order that you can have. It doesn't mean that other ones have their different attributes. Like if you, I know the recording's going to need some editing here, but
It's okay.
let me just back up and like reword that to make it easier. Um, so a domestic violence restraining order is typically established by first obtaining what's known as an EPO, or an emergency protective order. That's normally in the situation where domestic violence, just to like phrase exactly what that entails, doesn't always have to be boyfriend, girlfriend, boyfriend, boyfriend, girlfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, husband, husband. Sometimes it's mother, child, like adult child, maybe a 20-year-old child and a 50-year-old mother, or an uncle that lives with his niece, and they had a fight and they're both adults. So domestic violence can be a multitude of different things regarding the dynamic of the family
Yeah.
living together. So just to establish like what that means, and what a law officer in most states, and this doesn't constitute in every single state, in most states though, if both parties have a key to the home and they get mail in the home, that's what would constitute them living there. So at that point, the officer is going to ask questions like that. Do they live here? Are they getting mail here? Do they have a key to the home? So ladies, if you ever see a red flag, and men, if you see that red flag, don't give out your key. Don't
Yes.
allow someone to get mail at your home. I'm just going to put that out there right now
Oh,
for
yes.
boy, I think a lot of people in the situation wish they would have thought about that before they just dove in, like, oh, he's so amazing. Oh, here's my key. Like, oh no.
Oh, right. I've been there, and I didn't give the
It's like,
key, but he
yeah, it's
wasn't
like
trying to
slow
leave.
motion.
Yeah.
Oh no. Yeah, you gave it
What?
away
Now you're like,
and
what
you
am I gonna
can't
do?
get it back.
Yeah.
So coming back around to that EPO. So in an emergency situation, let's say somebody assaults somebody else, right? They hit somebody, and now we see bruises or blood or some kind of evidence of violence that happened.
Mhm.
Officers come out, whether they're sheriff's deputies or police officers, and they'll, make a report. They can and will most of the time issue an emergency protective order. Now, those emergency protective orders are very minimal in terms of time. That gives the victim maybe 3 to 5 days, depending on what state. Some states allow up to 10 days for that victim to get their tail down to the courthouse and get a protective order that is from a judge that is like more official.
Yeah.
And that's where they would receive a domestic violence restraining order. Now, in certain states, it doesn't matter if the man or woman doesn't want to press charges against the person who assaulted them or batteried them. The state will automatically pick up the charges, and that's where a criminal protective order comes in. So, what they would call a CRO or a CPRO.
Oh.
Criminal protective orders, the victim does not have a choice between having that order or not. They can, um, request that the judge not have it, but oftentimes the judge does not. They're going to impose that restraining order, especially if there were children involved. So criminal protective orders can protect children, witnesses if necessary. If there's multiple people that live in the house that were exposed to the abuse or were hurt or traumatized by the abuse, they may also be covered under those. And that applies for emergency protective orders and domestic violence restraining orders. Um, the criminal protective orders, now here's the thing that I think people need to realize, is if you have children and you have been given a criminal protective order and you are a mother of those children or father of those children, if you have an order that's been given by a judge, a criminal protective order for you and those kids, and you allow that person to come back to the home against those orders, you can now be charged with child neglect and abuse.
Wow.
So we have to be very careful how we approach all of these things, and just awareness. I can't express how important that it is just to be aware. And, sometimes, I studied a little law in college. I went to school for homicide investigation, and during some of my law classes, they teach you one of the things that we need is something called mens rea, which is Latin for guilty mind.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't know, you don't necessarily have a guilty mind, but knowing that it could harm your kids again, that's what they would consider to be your mens rea. And that's what
Yeah.
would make you guilty, even if you didn't know that it was the law.
Wow. That's amazing. I think that's something that needs to be talked about more for sure. Just because, in my experience, the protection order did not protect me. And they came to the house to serve the said person, and they hid from them, and they said they're not going to break down the door, left, and put me in harm's way to, what was that about? Why were they here? Kind of thing. And then it just kind of was a downhill thing from there, and didn't get served until the day I was assaulted. And then he was able to put one on top of me after, and it was just a whole mess. So I think it's really important that we speak more about this and have people be more educated on protection orders and what the ins and outs of that is. So I do appreciate you for explaining that and breaking that down, because I think it's very important to know those things in full detail. What are some common fears survivors have about filing one?
Well, I think the most common one that people aren't super vocal about, and I only find this out over dealing with victims for over a longer period of time, because sometimes everybody's very different. I mean, we have different personality types. I'm very type A. I'm very open and just tell it how it is, because I'm always afraid if I don't do that, I don't want to sugarcoat anything. I want them to know, like, hey, this can hurt you. This could, without judgment, of course, because one thing I don't want to do is I never want somebody to feel bad for making the choice to go back. And the reason I know people give me a funny look when I say that, but I'm like, they won't trust me again.
Yeah.
So I cannot do that to them. Why? I can't be their safe place.
Yeah.
There were days where we thought we wouldn't make it out, but we stuck it out. Today's our day. Today's our day. There were nights we would fight, no end in sight, nothing was right. Tonight's our night. Tonight's our night. I'll fight for you until this life is over. There's no giving up here, babe.
So in circumstances where a person, whether they want to vocalize the fact that they aren't ready to let go, this is one of the most problematic designs to humanity. When you love somebody, especially when you have children with them or you've been married to them, having that thought in your mind that you're going to leave um, can be a very daunting thought, just to even
Yeah.
get through that process. So there's different plans that people can make. One is just thinking about the plan, and that's just talking about it when you're still living in it. You're waking up every day with combat fatigue, which is, I mean, that's a literal term by a therapist that I learned, where you're always on edge and you don't know when they're gonna, snap. I mean, you just can't feel safe in your own body or your own home, and that is a just terrible way to live. I mean,
Yes.
it is a terrible, terrible way to live. And anybody listening to this, if you are living in a situation like that, you're number one, you're not alone. You are
Right.
not alone. And there are so many resources and people who do care. And I think one of the biggest things, so you're asking me like what their fears are. Well, people in the situation when they're just getting the idea in their mind and entertaining that thought,
Yeah.
they've normally at that point, they've been so darn isolated, they probably have one friend that has hung in there. And that friend is probably also tired of hearing about it. A
Yeah.
lot of us who've been through it can relate to that.
Yeah.
So that's where an advocate is so important. And I'm not even a formal advocate. I mean, this is something I do on my own. I volunteer
Yeah.
just to try to be a resource for people, help people. But there are formal advocates in most states, whether it's county issued. Um, Sadly, many police officers and law enforcement officers they become so calloused and cynical. They almost judge when they come. They just don't.
Yeah.
They're not. They lose that spirit of helpfulness. When when they get out of the academy and they do their swearing that they're as public servant, they're there to help people. Well, they lose that sense of love and loyalty to the public, and I don't want to say that goes for everybody, but many of them don't take the time that they could or should with a victim to help them get the resources that they need for support, whatever those resources might be.
Absolutely. I'm glad you said
Mhm.
that. That's a great point. Yes, absolutely. Um, what does a well-prepared safety plan look like in your experience?
This is an incredibly difficult question to answer because everybody is so different. This is like saying, how do you build a car? Like well, goodness,
Yeah.
like how many doors does it have? Like, does it have passengers?
Right.
Does it run on, petroleum or is it going, there's so many different things to think about. And that's where an advocate becomes really important because they walk through all of those things. Number one, most importantly, where do you live? I know that doesn't seem like a silly thing, but it is. I mean, there's
Yes.
certain states that give victims nothing at all.
Yeah.
And then there's other places where there's an abundance of resources, and whether it's like shelters or money, oftentimes victims don't realize there is money there to help you get out.
Yeah.
There's money there. And this is why they collect what's called restitution from people who are, convicted of crimes, and especially violent crimes. They pay a restitution that goes into a pool of money for states that allocate it to victims to get away. So that plan is a very diversifiedly structured. I mean, if it's a simple plan, boyfriend, girlfriend who's been together for 6 months with no common kids and don't live together, well, an escape plan would be change your number.
Yeah.
Move in with mom, move away from where you are. If you're not in a lease in your apartment where you live, delete your social media. I think what I like to do when somebody's talking about like, hey, I'm wanting to leave, I just kind of go down and talk them through, not a formal set of questions, but trying to get a feel for what is happening. Where is this person's head? Are you thinking about leaving tomorrow because you just got beat up yesterday?
Yeah.
Or are you like, man, this guy is really harassing me and manipulative to my kids, and I feel like he might hit me because maybe he has a drug problem, and we need to talk about doing this in 6 months. That's very different. These
Right.
are all very different synopses. So it's just a very complicated question to answer, and I don't mean to skirt around it, but surely you could understand why an advocate's there to
Yeah.
help.
No, you did an amazing job, and I love how you answered that question, because it really does matter. It does depend on the circumstances, right, of each situation. If kids are involved, if kids are not involved, and how dire that situation is, how violent they are, or if they have the opportunity to get away safely. So having an advocate, I think, is very important, and I loved how you answered that. So thank you so much. You did an amazing job with that. My other question is, how does having a protection order change a survivor situation?
Well, a little bit of this we covered previously, just because pertaining to that criminal domestic violence order where the victim doesn't have a choice. Even in a domestic violence situation, let's say, for example, I'm actually covering a current case, and I have to be careful about what I release about this situation,
Of
but
course.
she has children with the man who has abused her in front of the children. And they went to court, and I understand that the charges were dropped, which I mean, sometimes I hear this and it's just so frustrating, because it's like, oh my gosh, okay, well, our plan, now we have to go to plan B, right? Which is
Yeah.
like, now it's waiting in that situation for, is this going to happen again? Like, okay, well, can you move? But most of the time, if the police officers did their job, and I mean, in this particular situation, I actually went through all the legal paperwork. I mean, I spent a lot of time trying to help make sure that this didn't happen. It's just not in your control sometimes, and I hate to say that because it probably gives some people anxiety. The unknown is terrifying when
Yeah.
you are just looking for safety.
Yeah.
But having someone, and it doesn't, not necessarily me, there are state advocates in most states that will do almost exactly what I'm, talking to you about. There are people who want to help. There are resources. In most areas too, in most states, you can walk right into your courthouse and say, I'm living in a bad situation. Where do I go and how can I get help? And they're going to say, go right over there to self-help, tell that law student this, and they're going to give you the forms to fill out.
Yeah.
And they'll sit there and they'll help you.
Yeah.
So having that protective order, though, in certain states, there are programs that will allow, if you have a protective order, to receive something called a safe at home address.
Okay.
So once the victim has moved, which some states will actually pay for a movers, even a deposit on a new place. Yes, that is true as true can be. I can provide resources for that if needed. But once you move, you can register that address with an independent advocate of the county or state or city where you live, depending on how it works, because every city, state, and county has their own reciprocity. And once you send that off to the Secretary of State, they will issue you a card. So now when you go to the DMV or you go to your child's school to register them, you can now use that address, and you don't have to tell anybody where you live.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's really good.
Mm-hmm. Now, inside these restraining orders, oftentimes, if there's children involved, there are something called a carve out, which means that the judge is giving an allowance to the perpetrator or the person who the abuser, to have access to the child or children. Also, many times giving the ability to communicate peacefully with the victim.
Yeah.
In my opinion, if you are given an option, I strongly recommend to not allow that because there's such a wide variety of what is considered to be peaceful.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it can be so ambiguous, right? Peaceful can be, some people think peace is yelling. I'm half British, so there you go. I mean,
Like,
in my
that's peaceful.
family's all very loud, you know?
Yeah.
So there's that. Now, surrounding children, I mean, every parent has certain parental rights if they have not been like convicted of a crime or abused the children and things like that. But my best advice to anybody who does have a restraining order or who's ever witnessed any abuse to their children is to report it right away. If you have an EPO or any kind of or restraining order and it's being violated, 911 every time, no questions asked, 911. And that will, you know, those warrants eventually add up, and then they'll eventually go away and leave you alone. I mean, that's the end goal, is for you to get your peace and feel safe in your home and in your skin, and for
Yes.
your children to be safe again.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And I would love to ask, what advice do you have for someone listening who may be afraid to leave or file that report?
Well, fear is, I just want to say that fear is very real. There is something to be afraid of, especially if you have ever been strangled. People say choked. It is not called choked. It is strangled. Your odds of being murdered by somebody who has strangled you go up times 28. That is the percentage that I learned in the class that I took for victims of domestic violence. Should you be afraid? Absolutely. And that's why a plan is really important. But is freedom on the other side of fear? It truly, truly, truly is. It's something that you are going to have to face. So you have a choice.
Yeah.
The choice is only yours, only yours. And this is why I keep judgment so far away from the situation. It's not my business. It's not my choice.
Yeah.
It's not my choice. The choice is only to the victim of what they truly want. Now, sometimes they're going to stand there and feel like, but I'm alone. You know, I have another case that I'm dealing with, not to give too much information, but over the past 2 weeks, the domestic violence aggressor has thrown bombs. They're made out of glass and they have gasoline inside with a towel on it. And this person has thrown bombs into her car,
Oh my God.
up against her house. And I mean, she's got the restraining order is in place. She went to court. She's done all the right things.
Yeah.
He's still getting out, even though he's on video, and he's, you know, so
Yeah. And that
doing
happened.
something. Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, you're fine. Go ahead.
Think doing something is always going to be better than staying where you are. And something can just be a plan. Something can be a conversation. Something can be, while you are gone away from the house and you know that you're alone, look up resources. Call somebody, talk to somebody about it, you know?
Yeah.
Entertain the idea until you're comfortable enough to make action.
Yes. And I agree with you on that. I think that they definitely have to be ready for it. You're going to have some thick skin and really be prepared for your world to be turned upside down. It takes a lot to do that, but that's not to discourage. It's a beautiful thing on the other side. So like you said, there's freedom on the other side of fear. And I love how you said that. That's actually very beautiful because it is true. And I think that it's worth it, you know, but just definitely being able to escape safely. And, you know, the longer that goes on, it doesn't get better from there. It's not going to change because you can't change anybody but yourself. So it's really important that if that's the situation, just to find resources and be cautious and careful in how you get out of that situation.
If I may add one more thing here that I think is also really important. This is something that was very hard for me in the beginning of leaving. Because I mean, I think for the first 2 or 3 weeks, I was in very intensive therapy. I'm talking every day. Sometimes I would just go and cry almost for the whole hour. It was that rough. But it did get better. And I think the most important thing for me was truly being honest with myself. You know, telling myself like, I chose this. And not that the fault wasn't mine, just acknowledging, taking my accountability where I could,
Of
if
course.
that makes sense. That's
No,
really
yeah.
important.
That is definitely important, and I had to do the same. So we share that that experience as well. Is it's a huge part of the healing is being able to acknowledge, because there are three sides to every story, right? There's your side, their side, and the truth.
Amen.
And so I think that's very true. And taking accountability on all aspects is important, because you have to forgive yourself as well as forgive others, just for that healing to be able to take place. And one of the last questions I do want to ask is, what are some common mistakes or risks survivors face when trying to leave without a plan?
Well, as multiple survivors have unfortunately shared with me, every once in a while I have somebody that comes to me from different places, and we start talking, and I'm kind of giving an evaluation, like, what are your goals? What are you looking for? And I think the biggest mistake that I think people can make is, number one, like not having a plan and not understanding or being aware of how fast things can turn around, and now you being the victim can be the person being blamed.
Yes.
That is probably the most scary and real circumstance that can happen, and does happen more often than I want to admit. This is what creates a calloused soul for these officers,
Yeah.
because they get in a position that they just don't know who to believe. And now it's like, and they're frustrated because they want to help, they want to do the right thing. I don't think I've ever met an officer that just had a bad heart. Nobody gets into that field of work with the intention of like being a bad guy,
Yeah.
ever. I mean, every one of them have good hearts when they go into it, and they want to help. They love being the hero. But when they come to a call, and the call was, not the victim in the beginning, but they don't know that because they're not there. And I'll tell you, this is kind of the sad part too, and I don't want to go too down this path only because we're wrapping up on time.
Yeah.
But sometimes the dispatcher, they're looking up like, oh, well, this person had a misdemeanor for whatever, or even if it was nonviolent, the cop already has a tainted view of that person arriving on the call.
Yeah.
So having a clean record, I mean, if the victims have a clean record, just know that you have a benefit, I guess you could say, of like not having one, just because cops will believe you more.
Yeah.
But that's not always the case. I mean, I've literally heard about a victim being blamed when the abuser hurt himself on purpose.
Yeah, they do
When
that.
Yeah, and so I mean, we're going to talk about really crazy, like that's pretty out there.
Yeah.
But it does happen. And it happens more often than you might think. So the mistake is just not being aware of these things before a situation gets out of control. When there's red flags, pay attention.
Yes.
Please pay attention. Like, try hard to learn from other people's mistake. I know we're not all that way.
I know.
had to learn from myself.
We learned the hard way.
Guilty as charged.
Got to go through it and then be like, okay, I get it now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I don't know. There's many mistakes that we can make, but those are probably some of the biggest that come to my mind when you ask me that question. Like, be very cautious about how things can flip on you. We have to think through all of our actions with dangerous people.
Yes. Amen to that. I do. I agree. And that was beautiful, beautifully answered. Thank you so much for that. As we do close today's episode, I want to leave with a few just reminders. Remember that a protection order is a declaration that your safety matters, and having a strong exit plan is a pathway toward reclaiming your life. Always remember that your fear is valid, but it does not define you. And you are not alone. You are deeply worthy of peace, protection, and love. Never forget that you deserve to feel and be safe. You deserve to be heard, protected, and free. If this episode touched you, please share it. You never know who needs to hear it. Until next time, keep rising, my loves.